an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the whole wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. Thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. On a brand new week, it's Tuesday morning, 0830 on the Eastern Seaboard, and we are live streaming to you on Rumble. Rumble.com/AmRadPod is where you can find us. Always do get in the chat. The chat is live and lively as always. Like seeing you guys logging in early. We really appreciate the support there. As long as you're here with us, do remember to smash the thumbs up and follow our channel. If you want to subscribe, it's very appreciated. If you listen to the audio podcast on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart, any of those streaming platforms, make sure you subscribe there so you get the automatic update episodes when we drop them Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And take an extra couple of seconds and give us a 5-star rating so we can trick the algorithm into sharing the American Radicals Podcast with more people who are interested in really hard-hitting stuff, not just surface level legacy media things, deeper discussions that we pride ourselves on. That's what we base it on, always with a biblical worldview. And that's why Garrett is here. And Garrett is here, as always, with me today at GOB Actual. Hope that you survived your holiday weekend safely. Garrett, I only set you from the shoulders up, so I don't know. Maybe there was an amputation. There were no fireworks, but it is a communist holiday, so you never know if there's going to be a Haymarket riot or two, particularly in Wisconsin.
Funny. That's what I was going to come in with, Steve. Just you know me and my Marxist roots, especially just outside of Chicago, where the Haymarket affair happened back in 1888 or whenever that was. But nonetheless, we have the communist labor organizers to thank for our 3-day weekend. Although, as you know, Steve, I was joking in our group chat and said, when you are in FBI purgatory, every day is Monday. So, hey, even though it's Tuesday, fresh off the heels of our communist holiday, it feels like a Monday for me.
And there's a cultural adaptation of Labor Day. It's sort of the unofficial end of summer. I think just about all around the country. The kids are going back to school. So it's sort of the idea behind what I wanted to kick off this week on, which a discussion that we referenced last week that we were going to get into a little bit more detailed on education, which is why we're calling today's episode Dumbed Down. Found an overarching story that got my attention, and then it always adapts off of that. So we're going to talk about the failing school systems, and it's pretty intentional. It's pretty clear once you lay it all out as why that's going on in the government school systems. And then you march forward, ever forward, very much like the Marxists and communists who were out and about yesterday. That slow, long march has basically made its way all the way to the upper echelons of education, including higher ed in academia. So I want to get to all of that and more today, and start with this original piece that I saw at Daily Signal, and it was called "How American Voters Got Dumb," which it was appropriate. It was sort of a transcript, I guess, from a video that this gentleman shared, but I thought he had some interesting points and things that I didn't know about, And I thought that the American Radicals podcast audience would really appreciate to find out just how far we've slid down here. So this guy is Peter St. Onge, and he says that it's a modern fetish that we're brilliant, but our ancestors were idiots. After all, we have iPhones, and the founding fathers didn't, and cavemen didn't even have fire, right? So we're definitely way smarter than they were. There's also a condition called the Flynn effect, and it's the idea that people do better on puzzles, so we must be smarter. Not that we've taught the task, not that we've taught people how to do the puzzles, but we obviously are smarter. But thankfully, according to his study, he applied an objective measure of political campaigns, of the inaugural addresses of the President of the United States, and assigned an education level to each of their speeches. So I think everybody can remember recent memory. Joe Biden spoke at a 7th grade level. Donald Trump spoke at a 9th grade level, and Barack Obama spoke at an 8th grade level. So all middle school, freshman year, pretty similar, right? Well, let's go back a little earlier. Teddy Roosevelt, 14th grade. So middle of your bachelor's degree. Andrew Jackson, 22nd grade, PhD
Whoa.
level. And that was a populist man of the people. George Washington spoke at a 26th grade level.
Dang.
And keep in mind that nobody between 1789 and 1828 actually had a formal education.
Yeah, but they, dude, I love the thread of hubris, because this is what it comes back to. That's crazy. I mean, it sounds to me, and hey, maybe this is my own hubris, but I think you and I both are relatively smart guys and have a relatively robust vocabulary. Maybe I'm wrong, but let us know in the chat if you think I am wrong. But thanks for listening, anyways. But it sounds like George Washington and Andrew Jackson would be talking circles around even us. So I, I okay, maybe they didn't have the wheel back in the caveman era, but they figured it out. They learned these things as they went, and a lot of that has to do with mental acumen. And I don't know. It's crazy to think that our current president, which again, I know I mentioned the other day, but where is Joe Biden? Anybody been checking in on him
He's
lately?
like 18 days into a vacation.
Yeah, is he getting enough ice cream and enough naps? But he's speaking, and then Trump and Obama. So the last three, I mean, you're spanning, 8, 12, 16 years roughly. S- And this is modern America. Everybody's talking at like a junior high level. Okay, but we're smart.
I mean, it's when you put it into those objective terms, it's pretty damning where we are, because we do have the accoutrements of an intelligent society. But you talk about the fall of the Roman Empire, and we have to check off, right? How often do you think of the Roman Empire?
That's right.
But it's pretty well documented that once they fell, it was a giant step backwards intellectually, because they had progressed so far that people couldn't do upkeep on the roads. They were like, we don't know how to fix it. That intellectual knowledge, that institutional knowledge had not been passed along to them. It's not like society moves ever forward on a progressive trajectory. It does back up. And I think that intellectually it's pretty clear, but it's not like Idiocracy, where it's just happening because all the dummies keep having babies and it's going to be definitely a genetic thing. The way that film sets up that premise, I think Idiocracy is a little bit prophetic, the way that we are behaving, but I think there's a design behind some of it. And he points out in this transcript that he got into that the government school system, public education, is the driving force behind it. And historically, government schools were a thing in Prussia, and the leftist American elitists adopted it and brought it over here. It was in Prussia to sort of like quell the masses. There were all these protests going on. I guess they had their own Haymarket riots.
Hmm.
And the leftists, though, saw that as an opportunity to co-opt the children and make them as unlike their parents as possible. Very much like Woodrow Wilson was actually on record as saying as the president of Princeton.
Well, I mean, look at it. It worked. I mean, look, what is Prussia today? It's Germany. Even in World War I and World War II, the remnant of Prussia was still there too. It was not yet gone. So I don't know how far back the government school system in that region goes, but if you know anything about German culture today, they are very rigid and very into not in tune, like in step with government and positions and roles. A guy I went to the FBI Academy with, actually, he was a special forces soldier, West Point graduate, stationed in Russia, stationed in Germany for a little while. And I remember him telling me this, like at the FBI Academy one night, hanging out, that he was washing his car like in his driveway. I think it was like on a Sunday, and apparently there's like a law that in Germany that you can't do that. And his neighbor called the police, and the police showed up and like verbally reprimanded him. And he's like, well, I didn't know. And then he's talking to his neighbor, and his neighbor's like, yeah, I called the police. And he's like, why didn't you just tell me? And he said, that's not my job. It's their job. And it's like, I would say my belief is that that is rooted in this government control, which starts when you're a child in government indoctrination programs, aka public school. And of course, the Marxists adopted it here. One of the things, I think one of Satan's greatest tricks in the alleged land of the free was the creation and implementation of the Department of Education. And get your kids out of government school and get your government out of your life as much as you can.
Well, one of there's two main factors that I think he points to towards the very tail end of this transcript of this piece, about how this mission of the government school system has been furthered. And one was the fact that we outlawed in this country your ability as a private employer to hire people based on intelligence tests. You can't just issue somebody an IQ test when they come in and say, hey, you can or can't, you don't have the chops, the intellectual bandwidth, the gray matter between your ears to do this job. So that's illegal. But the market will find another way. So the way around that was to create middlemen, these middle steps, and basically, as a society, obligate people to participate in it in order to get employment. So we can't give you an IQ test, but you know what we can do? We can give you another kind of an IQ test when you're in school. And then based on how you perform on that IQ test, you'll go to a specific college. And then we just go to those colleges and recruit because we know that you have a higher IQ. But because that's become part of the hiring process for people and all the pressure of what college you're going to get into because it indicates your level of intelligence, we've taught the test to people. So we're just teaching them the puzzles, not making them any smarter, and then pushing them into these universities, which we'll see later today how that's associated with activism and not necessarily an education process. And the second component to this is the teachers unions that got involved with this process to personally enrich themselves. And they're teaching not just at the college level, but at grammar school level. They are teaching politics to kids as opposed to the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, as our very intelligent founders gave us because they were funny too. And nobody could come up with that one today. But they're actually neglecting the actual purpose for an education is to inform people and teach them how to think. But instead, they're just filling their minds of mush up with whatever political narrative is driving forward. And they're doing it from an extremely early age.
Yeah, that's the key right there. These days, the school system doesn't care, because think of teachers today. They are a product, probably more than any other, a product of that system. So you go to school, then you go to school to go back to school essentially and teach. And even when I was like in high school, it was very obvious that the vast majority of my teachers, I graduated high school in 2005. Okay. So it, that's almost 20 years ago now. But even back then, my entire high school time in the government school, it was like, oh yeah, these teachers, you can tell they wear it on their sleeve, their liberal ideology. And it was even laced into their teaching back then. And today, I would say, especially at the university level, it's that's the whole purpose, is to get people to buy into an ideology and not actually prepare them for some type of productive workforce down the road.
I'm pivoting off of this, and I think it's kind of funny. It's interesting. I found this piece over at The Hill where it's a leftist rag. Let's just be honest about that. The author of it tries to say, well, we can find common ground here. The Venn diagram overlaps with this problem that we're seeing. And I think that this is someone who's a product of these school systems, a product of having all their ideology indoctrinated into them their entire lives. And then also looking back to how to solve problems is always to the state. And it's related to what we're talking about today because you think, oh, we're really dumb. The first order thinking is, well, we just need to teach people in school. We just need to get the kids in school, right? They're not going to school. So let's educate them. But define education, right? If you're going to a government school and they're teaching you what pronouns you are, not actually what pronouns are in common parlance and how to read and write properly, then you're going to be this guy down the line making the argument in favor of it. So it's an interesting and I don't know, I guess his perspective is basically just like look to daddy government, right? It's demeaning to a certain extent. He's not trying to be. I don't think he can help himself, but he basically says we need to have a goal of reducing absenteeism at school by 50%. So we're going to set metrics because too many kids are missing school, particularly after coronavirus. So before coronavirus, about 15% of public school students were chronically absent. So what does it mean to be chronically absent? You miss 10% of the school year. So about 1 in 6, 1 in 7 kids were meeting that threshold, but it basically doubled during coronavirus and it hasn't come back down. Now, you and I, as critical thinkers, might say, well, did people just say, the heck with it? I'm not going back to school because I don't like it? Did people like you and me say, these schools are garbage and I saw the Zoom school, so I'm going to teach the kids myself? Because I don't think that this ratio here is taking those into account. I mean, I guess it is looking at an overall proportion for the kids who are attending. But I think there's definitely an element as at play of saying there's nothing valuable here. There's nothing that I'm learning here. But he sees it as a problem. We need to endeavor to use everything we can to get kids back into the school. And why? Why? Well, here are the problems that this guy can identify with. So chronically absent students are less likely to read proficiently by 3rd grade. Agree. They're more likely to struggle academically later on in middle school and drop out of high school. Agree. I think that people who don't go to school probably are not good at school later on. Kind of basic. I don't think you need to have a PhD to figure that one out. But then he gets into long-term effects beyond schools, impairing your development of social, emotional skills. And that's like, how do you interact with people? And that was the myth of homeschool kids, right? They're all socially awkward because they never learn how to talk to people. And then executive functioning skills, which would be, can you set a goal, a long-term goal? Can you be prompt and behave in ways, not necessarily passing the content of the class, but just the way that we conduct ourselves. And again, I think that that can be achieved outside of a school context. And then he says, it gives away the game. Chronic absenteeism also worsens equity issues, deepening opportunity gaps for Black, Latino, Native American, and low income.
There it is.
So apparently, if a white guy misses school, he's not going to struggle as much as a Black guy who misses school.
It's so racist. It's the most racist thing that they pull. And of course he puts it in right at the end because that's the main point that he wants to leave you with is it's an equity issue. And people of color and minorities, they're going to be the ones most disproportionately affected. I just watched this YouTube video a few days ago and it was a guy going around I think he was in New York. Yeah, he is in New York and he's going I think at first he was on a college campus and he's going up to white people and asking them about voter ID laws. And of course, every single one, and maybe there were a couple outliers that they cut out or whatever, but every single one in the video was, it's racist to have voter ID laws, blah, 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 blah. Then he goes to the Bronx and he's asking just Black people if they have ID, if they have access to the internet, because all these reasons that the white people were giving as to why voter ID laws are racist. And every single Black person's like, why would they say that? Of course I have an ID. Why wouldn't I have an ID? Everybody has an ID. And then one of the questions was, do you know any other Black people who don't have an ID? And they're like looking at the guy weird and like, what do you mean? No, everybody. Why would we not have ID? And it's like, it's this right here. It's this equity argument. Like no one in real life believes that somebody because they're Black or Latino are going to be affected any different than some white kid. Like, dude, it just
listen to some of his suggestions to solve the problem of kids not going to school. So the first one is, I mean, look, this is a guy who just has a vocabulary, but not hasn't really thought through what these words mean and the actual action attached to them. So the catch-all: we need clear communication. What does communication mean to the Hill? Governors and state education leaders need to raise parents and students' awareness about the value of showing up to school every day. So the governor says, hey, kids, stay in school. That'll fix the problem. I don't know what kind of sitcom life that you live, but that's not really a compelling argument. But second key is to support families and engage students on issues like community safety, physical and mental health resources, and unstable housing. So he thinks that we need to give government housing to people so that their kids will go to school.
Mhm.
Schools must offer students learning spaces that are not only safe, but engaging and welcoming, where each student is known and knows it. So, a softer, gentler side of Sears is what we need in these hard urban areas where kids are just hoping to not get mugged on their way to school. Maybe
Yeah.
that's why they're not going. And the third one is accountability. Parents and students, that means reestablishing attendance habits that were common a few years ago. So, we're going to tell them it's really important to stay in school, and you need to get back in the habit of staying in school.
I love this too because why are those patterns gone? It's because of what the government did. The government was the one that said you can't go to school anymore. Don't show up in person, and we'll try to figure it out. And oh, by the way, if you're going to even be anywhere, you need to wear a mask, and that's going to inhibit children's learning. It's going to inhibit their speech. It's even going to inhibit how they interact and how they learn because they're not seeing facial expressions. But you just do what we say, and now a few years later, oh hey, actually, we see that this isn't working, and we want to revert. So again, just do what we say. Good grief.
And the learning loss, as they called it, attached to keeping kids home. They're like, oh, well, the kids are resilient, so they won't have any learning loss. Oh, wait, we had learning loss. So we need to get them back into the indoctrination camps. We don't really care that they can't read. We just care that they can't read. And we need those bodies in the school because those are attached to funds, which is
Mhm.
the other element here that the
Mhm.
Hill article doesn't get into. But
Yep.
if kids aren't going to school, that hurts their funding, which hurts teachers' unions from being able to contribute back to the types of politicians who will build government housing because that will be somehow encouraging of kids who go to school. Nonsensical solutions to a problem that I don't even know if it's necessarily a problem. I think the problem is that the schools stink and they're not teaching kids and not making it clear to them that this is a path to success. I think if you're going to argue for resiliency and common sense, most kids look around and say, this isn't going to help me in my life,
Mhm.
in my world. Well, then maybe we should revert back to what we did when Andrew Jackson was speaking at a PhD level and retool the education system so that there's an actual benefit to using your time there.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, uh, I've mentioned it before on the show. Like we watch Little House on the Prairie. It's one of our little family endeavors that we partake in sometimes. And the kids were all going to the schoolhouse in town, and it was all grades and one teacher, and they were coming out being able to speak like Andrew Jackson with a far superior intellect. So what changed? What were we doing different? Oh, you know what it was? We got more government injected into our life and more government control and more government mandate, and it's all they really want to do is take your children's brain and mold it like the clay that it is at those young ages. And I would say all of them, all of the young ages from kindergarten, so like 4 or 5 years old, all the way to college graduate with a bachelor's degree at 21, 22 years old. The government is molding that brain to be what they want. And no wonder no wonder we look at the college universities or colleges and universities today, or new teachers entering the workforce in public school, government school, or people protesting or whatever else. The vast majority of them are way off the ledge into the liberal ideology. Well, how do you think they got there? It's because their brain was the clay that was being molded for the last damn near 20 years.
I was thinking because I watched The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance recently,
Oh,
rewatched it, and John
classic.
Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, and there's a part there where he's going to be a teacher in this small town, right out, I believe in Arizona. That's what he wants to do is set up a school, and they go to the schoolhouse, and there's grown men in there trying to learn to read, And along in there, they're reading at the same level as the 6 or 7-year-old kid because they're all trying to get that skill, because that skill is a fundamental skill that's going to make their life better. It's going to give enrichment to their life.
Mhm. Yep.
Whereas learning that there's 666 genders, not so much. And that'll take us to a nice transition point for some of the stories we're going to use of, I don't want to attend these schools. I wouldn't want my kids or Garrett's kids to attend these
Right.
schools. We got some crazy examples we're going to get to in a second, but let's pause for a moment and thank today's sponsor, which is the True Earth Pharmacy. You can go to trueearth.co, trueearth.co, and our promo code there is AMRAD24, AMRAD24, and that'll get you 10% off store wide. They have the fertilizer products there that can help you as we're moving out of the summertime and into the fall. Any things you have to going on in your garden, maybe you want to do some more planting. They have a wide selection. Give them a call, find out what's going to be the best for your particular grow that you have going on. And then also there's the personal supplement portion of it. Again, you can always give them a call, find out what sort of maladies are afflicting you, the best way to resolve those naturally. You don't necessarily need Dow chemical all the time. You just might need a nice helping of some black turmeric or some lion's mane. And you can get it for 10% off if you go to trueearth.co and use the promo code AMRAD24. All right.
I'm gonna do a shameless plug here because you mentioned not wanting to send your kids or my kids to these government indoctrination camps, and reading and how grown men were reading. I just put it up on the screen. So if you're just listening, it's called Teach Your Children to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. This is what I can't really take credit because it's 99.9%. It's Heidi who does the teaching. But this is the program we use to teach our children to read, and all of them, even Paige, who's 5, she's already reading, and obviously at a lower level, but all of them are way ahead of the curve. And again, I'll say it: get your children out of government school. I tell my girls all the time, reading is a superpower. It 100% is. And I mean, I'm sure everybody listening, or probably just about everybody listening, knows how to read. But I tell them that it's a superpower because, especially for girls, even still in many places in the world, they're not allowed to even be taught to even know how to read or write. And it is 100% a superpower. And your government is failing you again. But should anybody be surprised by that?
And they're trying to rethink the wheel and make education better, or they're trying to make it just new and novel and effectively worse. So talk about reading. None of the stories really went into this particular element for curriculum on reading, but now there's a push away from hooked on phonics, work for me, where you sound out the letters and sound out the words.
Kid on phonics.
And now we just put a picture there and have the kid guess what the word needs to be there. So, there could be a picture of a horse and the kid says pony. Well, close enough, right?
Yeah.
Looks the same.
Good enough.
Well, it's the same overall idea. Well, actually the author put horse there. So there's probably a purpose for that, not pony. And that's what the trend was at a lot of these school districts, and other trends that are equally as disturbing. So we're going to go to a couple of states. The first two come out of California. So, all right,
know where you're
gird
headed.
your loins, folks. Get your AMRAD barf bags ready. It comes from Daily Signal. Usurpation of parental rights. District's gender inclusion training costs taxpayers $1.5 thousand. So $1,500 from the school district. And that's not nothing in some of these school districts that are smaller, and particularly if there's no actual substantive value to it. The workshop at a Southern California school district included training on creating, quote, gender support plans using this organization or entity. It's called Gender Spectrum. They have a form that's on there, Gender Spectrum's form, which hides the child's gender identity from his parents. According to Gender Spectrum, gender inclusive schools like those in South Pasadena, quote, interrupt binary notions of gender, question limited portrayals of gender, and acknowledge and account for gender diversity. Not seeing a whole lot about how to read, though. You're probably going to be saying pony, horse, same difference. Recommendations, according to Gender Spectrum, include designing lesson plans on gender identity, inserting gender identity into curriculum, using literature with themes of gender diversity, assigning gender-related projects, and highlighting transgender people in history. Can you name a transgender person in history, and what grade level did they speak at their presidential inauguration?
No, none. Caitlyn Jenner, I guess, would be the closest. What's his real name? Because I know his name.
Bruce?
Bruce.
Bruce
Bruce
was
Jenner.
such a stud that he got kids to eat sticks of wheat for breakfast. And now we have to be told that if you drink his breast milk, you in fact can go to the Olympics and win a gold medal.
Dude,
But it's also worth noting here, and then it's not part of this school district, but Gavin Newsom, governor of California, signed legislation barring school districts from requiring that parents be informed if their child changes their gender identity
I
in
mean,
the state of California.
think of that. It's just it's the but of course, it's the opposite of God's design for a family. It's oh man, and Joe Biden said it. He said there are children. Oh, maybe a year ago in a speech. Um, of course, that's what these evildoers in government think and want and truly believe. They want to seize your children and make them basically proxies of the state. Longtime listeners of the show will remember we covered Animal Farm over the course of 3 Saturdays a while back, and George Orwell's other book, 1984. Or I mean, I know he's written more than one book, but or more than one other book. But in that book, what were adults afraid of? They were afraid of the children because they literally were proxies of the state. Well, that's where we're headed. And now the government is even saying, or at least the government in California is even saying, we're not even going to tell you what your child does or decides or doesn't do or whatever gender they think they are. We're not even going to be compelled to tell you. Your government hates you.
And it's state law now. And there's another school district, another story from Daily Signal that sort of addresses that very issue. It's the Capistrano Unified School District in southern Orange County. And Orange County is relatively conservative, allows students to change their name and gender in school records without their parental permission. And there's a couple of things in here that stuck out to me. Counselor warned a school psychologist against changing the student's name in a particular portal because the parents could access it. So they're doing it completely in secret. And then counselors in the schools are being trained to help kids transition. There's emails, evidence to document this. An academic advisor sent a training assignment to a school counselor. All right, so an academic advisor who worked for the school sent another training assignment, I guess, to an underling, a school counselor, asking her to consider her personal biases on LGBTQ issues and the human cost to transgender students in a 3 to 4 page essay. She got an essay of homework because she worked for the California School District. I don't even feel bad for her. I got to be honest.
No, not at all. And
You see that happening, you're being assigned that and you are not gone the next
Yeah,
day, you're
right.
part of the evil.
Yeah, you're part of the problem, and it's my job. I've got bills to pay. Yeah, we all do. And if we all stood up and resisted this evil as a unified voice, like the headline says, parents outraged. Well, we've talked about it before with these school districts. I think wasn't it like one in Maryland or Virginia or somewhere recently where they're just plowing ahead regardless of what the parents want because, well, the school board said so. And it's like,
Virginia, Fairfax County.
yeah. And it's like, okay, well, the government is supposed to listen to the people. That's how this nation was established. Was the government was supposed to be your representation that did the will of you, of what you wanted. So you elect the people to the school board, and then they just blaze ahead with the agenda that they want. The molding of the gray matter, the clay that is your children's brains. They're just going to plow ahead and disregard what you think. They don't care about you as the parent because you know what? You're not really the parent. To them, they're the parent. Your child is just a ward. And maybe you house them and feed them maybe one meal during the school year because don't worry, the government will take care of the others when they get to school. And you're on the hook for that. And so, yeah, we're just going to do what we want because we're in charge and you're just a peasant. So don't bother us.
Well, maybe it's just limited to California, right? Like that's the
For now.
liberal left coast there. What goes on in California? Maybe they'll have an earthquake and the entire state will become detached and it'll float away, and all of our ills and problems will be solved, right, Garrett? Or we could go to the land of 1,000 genders, Minnesota, and that's Tim A. Walz. vice
The
presidential
best nickname for
nominee.
him.
And they have his photo here. This comes from the Blaze because this is a board that exists in Minnesota who he's appointed several members of it to. Plus that photo of him pointing out is just hilarious. So good job by the Blaze
Yeah.
pointing out how this guy is not America's dad. But in April 2023, the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board. So this is the board in Minnesota where you have to go to get your teaching license in order to become a school teacher in that state, right? They updated this standards of effective practice that they have and required all prospective educators applying for their initial teaching license. So if you want and you've never taught before, you're not getting an update, you have to go through some of these standards, Garrett. And I'll read some of them off, and let's see if we, as people who maybe can understand an inaugural address higher than a 7th grade level, see if we can get through them. And the other thing I want to mention is the people that wrote these, do they have any clue what they're saying? Or are they just trying to use $10 words that really don't have any significant meaning, but sound smart? So, oh, you must know what you're talking about. I think that's likely what it is. A couple of the quotes. The requirement is the teacher understands the diverse impacts of individual and systemic trauma, such as racism and micro and macroaggressions on learning and development, and knows how to support students using culturally responsive strategies and resources to address these impacts. What's a culturally responsive remedy to a particular student? Would you say, well, what's your heritage? And I can't yell at you because in that culture, they don't yell. That seems kind of inappropriate. Isn't it just a government school? Isn't there just an American heritage?
Right. I'm still trying to understand what you just said. It's like I think of oh, what's the movie? It's is it Billy Madison where he's like, what you just said
Is
is
the dumbest, most incoherent thing. All of us are, in fact, dumber for having heard it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
yes. And so to be a teacher in Minnesota, you have to go through this charade of a program to what? Give you the woke stamp of approval that you're going to make make a safe space for every child. It really goes back to the 3 R's that you said: writing, reading, and arithmetic. And
Well, in that first one, it's how are you dealing with the kids, at least. It's supposed to be student focused. This one is now very navel gazing and introspective. They have to assess their own biases and perceptions, and academic training may affect their teaching practice and perpetuate oppressive systems like raise your hand to speak, teaching practices, and utilizes tools to mitigate their own behavior to disrupt these oppressive systems. So they should just say, kids, in my classroom, you can just talk whatever you want.
right, yeah, just interject whenever you need, get up and leave whenever you want because it's oppressive. Oh, don't mind the bell when the class gets let out and when the next class starts because it's oppressive. Oh, and you know what? Feel free to come and go because it's oppressive having doors and a
It's
schedule.
systemically racist to have doors.
Yeah, like like at what point does it stop? You know, because using their vocabulary and arguments, I know we're kind of tongue in cheek here, but you can make an argument that all of those things are oppressive and restrictive.
And
So
that's the point. The people that are making that argument, that are putting out this literature, have been fully indoctrinated through the government school system, and they speak this language fluently. They don't understand it. I mean, it's just a language that is communism, just with lots of prefixes and suffixes, and we're going to say racism a whole bunch, and assume that because the words I use have multiple syllables in them, that I know what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
like
And
ethnocentrism or whatever.
the third one, yeah, that ahead of time, and so the American Radicals podcast audience knows, we did try to understand this one ahead of time. We pre-gamed this one, and we couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, because in fairness, I said to Steve, I was like, "What are those words?" And you see them at the bottom if you're watching ethnocentrism and Eurocent. I was like, "What do these even mean?"
So it says the teacher understands how ethnocentrism, Eurocentrism, deficit-based teaching, and white supremacy undermine pedagogical equity. Pedagogical equity. All right.
I,
All right.
I
Well,
was focused on the other ones because I don't understand them, the isms. But what is deficit based? What is that?
that
Deficit
is the
based teaching?
concept that the kids are an empty vessel that needs to be filled up by
Oh, there
the
it is.
teacher.
Yeah, they're molding the gray
I mean,
matter.
it could be phonics, but more than likely, it's going to be talking to you about ethnocentrism, right?
Yeah, and hiding your gender from your parents.
And pedagogical equity just means teaching. Pedagogy
just
just means teaching.
just means teaching, but we can't use that word because it doesn't sound
Well, because
eighth grade enough.
yes, we need to use Andrew Jackson terms,
Yeah.
not Joe Biden terms. And they talk about backgrounds and identities. The teachers must affirm things like gender identity, and sexual orientation. As always, in the land of a thousand genders, Minnesota.
You know what's crazy too is like think of so this is a mandate. This is the government of Minnesota saying you have to do this if you're going to teach. So uh imagine some, I don't know, 25, 28-year-old kid coming out of college or their master's program and they want to teach. And maybe they don't buy into this crap. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to most of them are probably going to self-suppress their own speech and toe the line and write the essay or what point to themselves as some type of bigot. And yes, I'm going to recognize this throughout my career and I'm going to do better so I can, help children be whatever they want to be. And in this day and age, that you could be a cat. And as if you tell your teacher you're a cat, then they have to use your purring pronouns or whatever. Like it's that's crazy, man. It's just where does it go from here? I couldn't imagine, thinking back to when I was in high school, like I would never have guessed it would have gone this far so fast. But here we are.
And it's back to that Flynn effect. You think that because you can do the puzzle that you're smarter. We have iPhones now. Well, we have reached a higher threshold. We can understand fully that, there's not just men and women. There are cat people who need a litter box. And that's presumed to be a higher intellect level. But really what boils down to is the fact that you might think you're a cat because you're a moron and you've been told that that's possible your entire lives. And Joe Biden talking at a seventh grade level is actually so far ahead of you that you think, wow, that guy, what he's got to say, I can't even understand it.
He's so smart. And you know what else, Steve? He's so brave because he's looking out for cat people like you and me.
Stunning and brave, and he's doing it from a Delaware beach somewhere. All right, let's go to a different state, though, to Maryland, and now we'll get into some of the actual 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and how they're failing in Maryland and how um, they are counting on the parents just pushing their kids through. It's not even just the school doing it in secret. So this one talks about kids not being able to read at a third grade level, not
That's
passing the third grade, as you would
you
presume,
would
right?
imagine, yeah.
Maryland won't force struggling readers to repeat the third grade, though.
Oh, just usher them along, Steve. It'll be fine.
There was, in their defense, and Maryland is a very blue state, and they're actually going to be getting away from the horse and pony way of reading. I think they're going to be going back to phonics. So
Well,
maybe
that's good.
maybe reality hit them pretty hard in the face, and that could be just the fact that Baltimore is a failed city. In July, Education Department in Maryland drafted a mandate for third graders to be held back if they aren't reading at third grade level, which stands to reason. You should be in the schoolhouse and the man who shot Liberty Valance with the younger kids trying to actually understand the material.
hmm
But they revised it and they said that parents can now challenge the school district's decision to make a child repeat third grade. And it's contingent on their kid has to participate in before school help and after school help. So basically, we failed your kid. We failed to teach your kid to read at a third grade level. The solution is send him back to us
Yeah,
for more
more
time.
more school. Yeah. Good grief. But also like the parent, don't you want your kid to read at the appropriate level before just moving them along? Like, why would you even challenge it? Because I would imagine that the state's standard for what the third grade level is probably pretty low because you want to get to like a median level. Like, okay, this is a decent level where most kids are going to attain it and get through. That's not very robust. And quite frankly, that's the government school system. It's not very robust. It's can we try to make a system where we can usher everybody through and have them come out the other side, somewhat capable. Well, these days they're not even coming out somewhat capable. And now when the school district or state itself is saying like, hey, they're not really up to snuff with the reading, like so we're going to hold them back, and maybe next year they'll do better. And then the parents are arguing, like, you're part of the problem at that point.
Are you worried about the stigma attached to your child as they have to repeat the third grade, as opposed to the stigma of your child who can't read by the time he
Yeah.
matriculates through an entire education system for 12 years, which is going to wind up happening because they're just going to pass the kid along.
Hmm.
But they now have bonus time of summer school and before school and after school, so they can fill his ideas in his head with what gender he's going to be. And he'll have very, very high confidence in himself and being told and affirmed that he doesn't have to raise his hand because that's an oppressive system, but he won't be able to read The Cat in the Hat.
Yeah. I mean, pick your oppression, I guess, because I mean, if you just think about that synopsis right there, it's, would you rather be oppressed to the degree where you're actually not learning anything, or would you rather just be able to claim your oppression and then blame the state for that? And how many of these kids are going to get to a point where they realize they're not learning, but they're reading the tea leaves, and they can just say, well, hey, you know what, I'm a transgender at this point, and take care of me now the rest of my life, because you're the state, and that's what you're here for, and you're not actually here to teach me to read. And I realized that in third grade or fourth grade, when you just ushered me along, or even when you graduate high school and you realize like half the class oftentimes shouldn't have made it, and they did, and then they become just a drain on society, and they don't amount to being productive to help our country actually be functioning.
How this is conjecture, it's not part of the piece, but how I would wager a healthy amount that there's a disparity in the racial categories as it pertains to third graders being able to read at a third grade level, and maybe the state level school organization, whatever the Department of Education said, we're going to get blamed for being racist, so we have to let all the kids pass or give them that option. Meanwhile, we'll get extra time with people who are a minority, and during that time, we can fill their heads with the fact that the system is actually what's failing them and keeping them down, and they'll be more of a zealot for that, and we'll just activate them. Like that's where my mind goes to a potential nefarious intent behind this, other than just we just need some extra time to bang them over the head about ethnocentrism.
Yeah, whatever that is.
So the next one comes out of New York City, Garrett. New York City
New York
is having
City.
some failing school systems, and I do like the fact that they bury some of it, and this will be like The Hill, right? The problems that they like to spotlight are not related to what is actually the problem. So this comes from the New York Times, the old gray lady. Um, I can't say democracy dies in darkness, but they're basically the same level of liberal rag. So the piece is called "As NYC reading scores slip under new program, officials urge patience." Okay, 53% of children in grades 3 through 8 were proficient in math. So just
That's not
over
very
half.
good.
49% were proficient in reading, so fewer. So, but roughly half of the kids are proficient at reading and writing and arithmetic in New York City. Now, the exam results that they used cast a harsh spotlight on inequity in schools because 2/3 of the white test takers were proficient and only 36% of Hispanics were proficient. That's the takeaway from the New York Times. Uh, I, I don't even need to make it about the minority. You're telling me that 1 out of 3 white kids in New York City can't read?
Yeah.
How is
That's
that for ethnocentrism, Eurocentrism keeping you down?
yeah. That's it right there. It doesn't matter. Like, we're just so focused on the wrong things here. Like, it doesn't matter the race. Like, you're failing everybody. The government is failing everybody at this point. But don't worry, just trust us and just be patient, and we'll make it better. No, you won't. And at what point, like, are people truly going to be like, they keep saying like they're going to make it better, but everything keeps getting worse. So maybe we need to come up with some other system or some other idea on how to teach our children.
You're more Pollyannish than I am, because I think that the people that would be in the position to make that determination are the parents, and they've already been through the system and they
Mhm.
are dumb.
Yep.
They're
And
dumb, so they're not paying attention to this because dagnabbit, I went to school and I made it through, so you can make it through, and we're
yep.
not going to take an interest because I'm just too darn comfortable,
Hmm.
and it's not fun to go back and help my kid out with his homework. Meanwhile, you probably can't do the homework because you couldn't do it before, even though it's been dumbed down even further since when you did it.
Sense, right. And I didn't think of it until just now, but the other piece of that is probably you're right. They don't have an interest in doing it. They don't know how to do it themselves. They want their kid just ushered through. For what? For the end goal of get out. And it's like that. It might be kind of cynical of me, but I think that it is actually a bigger piece of it is parents don't want to be parents. And
Or they do, and they want their kid to succeed, and they have to get through to get out to get to the college campus level, right? Because that's the trajectory. And who cares? You take $200,000 loan out, you'll definitely have that paid off. Uh,
yeah.
but go to college because that's the path that we've all been told. You were told that, and we're parents now. Kids in school are being told that still, even a generation before that was being told that. And that's really where we're at this point. And we talked about how it's a scam, right? The way that they use that system as an IQ guide, as opposed to actually an institution where you got information into your head that was going to be useful for you in a professional context. It's not really there. And that will be a healthy way for us to transition to the final one I wanted to share today. And this is just an image. So for those reading, you're going to have to come to us. We're about the 51-minute mark here in the American Radicals podcast. And this was shared on social media. And it is a nice chart that is documenting the protests that we saw, all those Hamas riots in the
Yeah.
school campuses. And there's three colors: green, red, and blue. Blue being
Oh, this
no
is
protests, red being protests, and green being protests with encampments, right? Where they were like in their tents. And they charted it out with the price point of the school. And wouldn't you know it, the higher the tuition, the more that people were protesting, and the even more people were camping out because they weren't spending time actually learning anything. Whereas the lower tuition rates indicated to me, at least, either going to a state school or maybe even a community college, because you're there to learn the skill. And that's why you're there, not to sort of get your woke bona fides.
yeah, it's crazy looking at this graphic because the correlation of the tuition and fees with essentially the level of protest. It's kind of stunning actually to see how the how it really starts to peak towards encampment as the tuition and fees goes up.
And
What is the
and the other element to it is the horizontal item that's being, because so the vertical is the tuition fee.
yeah, the
The
percent Pell Grant.
the horizontal is the Pell Grant, which is grants for poor kids to go to college.
Hmm.
And
I got Pell Grants, not gonna lie, before I had my GI Bill because I went to school for 1 year.
and they are not protesting,
Yeah,
which I'm encouraged by that. If there's anything encouraged about that, there are not kids that are getting taxpayer money to go to school and camp
yeah.
for Hamas. So
Which
maybe that's the one silver lining of
Mhm.
today.
Yeah, they actually want to learn a skill or a trade or whatever they're going to college for, and then get into the job market and be a productive member of society. So maybe that is a silver lining because we've talked about it many times at this point is the comfort issue. Well, if you look at that chart, the green dots, the more expensive school, the less likely you're having government aid because mom and dad are paying for it or whatever. And so of course, because you're the most comfortable, so you have more time to dwell on how many genders there are. And you say you're a white student that comes from a rich white family. Well, you realize that you're the problem. So you're going to join the Hamas encampment. So maybe
You
that is
totally
good.
won't have your head chopped off if you went over there.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've reached the end of the content we're going to bring to you. I do have a palate cleanse, but as always, going to yield the floor to Garrett. See if you have anything you want to share with us.
Yeah, for sure. I got to pull it up here. I was jumping back and forth a couple places. I mean, I can always reference Proverbs. I think it's 22:6. Raise up your child in the way they should go, and they will never depart from it. But it seems like I kind of beat that horse very often, and I've been in I've been at the well of Proverbs a lot lately, it seems. So I'm going to go to the book of Psalm, which I guess I've been there a lot lately too. But this one kind of stands out to me. It's Psalm 78. I'll try to pop it up here on the screen as well, so you can read along if you're watching. But Psalm 78, I'll just read the first few verses. It says, "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from old, things that we have heard and known, that our fathers have told us." Notice there, it doesn't say that our government has told us. It's that our fathers have told us. We'll not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generations might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. And of course, for me, that's where it all comes back to is, don't have a stiff neck. Don't be a stiff-necked people. I've talked about it before. We can still pray for our nation. We can repent on behalf of our nation. This is no coincidence. The horrifying, and I truly mean that, it's horrifying to see what's happening in the schools, what's happening with the woke ideology, even with encampments and protests. Our nation is a nation that is under judgment. That much ought to be clear. But God is a gracious God. And I think that grace is running out. You wouldn't see these type of things in a nation that was truly being blessed still, like we were in the past. So that's all. I commend you to, or I guess I exhort you to pray for your nation and yourself to turn back to God and in the ways that we should go. It's our only hope.
Well said, sir. In the palate cleanse, we talked about the founding fathers speaking at a higher level, and this is a comedic take on what the old people today will be versus the old people of tomorrow, particularly if we follow the same trajectory we are in the education system. It's probably pretty close to where it'll wind up.
From a mixed race family, my mother is white and my father is dark white, so I have a very diverse ethnic background. My dad's getting old, man. He's getting really old. Starting to hang plates on his wall. That seems to be an age. I love old people, man. I always hang out with old people. Hang out with old people, they teach you how to slow down and just take your time. You ever want to learn patience? Sit with your father and watch him enter his email address with an Apple TV remote. That'll teach you patience. Get to know the old people, man. Because the new old people that are coming are going to be the worst old people we've ever had. We got some terrible old people coming, man. 50 years from now? Old people now still have stories. You ever sit with an old person and look at their photos? Every photo's got a story. What's this, Grandma? Here is a picture of your great-grandfather standing beside Charles Lindbergh before he flew across the Atlantic. First ever transatlantic flight in history. That's an amazing story. Can you imagine listening to the stories of old people's photos 50 years from now? How terrible that experience is going to be? What's this, Grandma? Here is a picture of my breakfast. What? What a breakfast. And here are some shoes I once thought about buying. And here is the wing of a plane. And here is the weather forecast. And here is a picture of your great-grandmother staring at herself in the bathroom mirror. And here are 12 more of that exact same photo.
That'll do it for us today. I think that's a sad state of affairs, Garrett. But hopefully we can raise a man up, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right,
I love
guys.
it. That's great.
No, just a reminder, make sure that you smash the thumbs up if you haven't already, and do follow us. We appreciate you as always. We'll be back with you here on the American Radicals podcast Thursday 8:30 Eastern time. Until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.